Selina is president and CTO of SurveyMonkey. Show of hands quickly. How many of you have participated SurveyMonkey? Wow.
Awesome.
User acquisition is not a problem. It's done. Now it's all about churn. And then you were the founder of Evite back in the day.
Long
so you
time.
had a lot of experience with the free to paid model of acquisition. And really, I want to kick it off with a very simple question. Giving a product away for free is technically easier. How do you look at that conversion from when do you get a user to go from free to paid? What strategies have you put in place? How have you done that?
Sure. So when you think about moving a user from free to paid, you have to think about what's going to drive them to actually pay you. And there's generally 3 models. So there's one model which is usage-based. I saw Samir from SendGrid is going to be up here later, and it's the number of emails that you send. So it's a usage-based model. The second base model is user-based. So if you think about Google Apps, it's you pay per user, number of users. And then the third is feature-based. And in a way, that's the hardest because you're trying to figure out what features would drive a user from free to paid. But the reason you would do feature-based is if your business is viral. So if your business is viral, you do not want to limit usage. And so if you think about SurveyMonkey, it's really important that most of you who raised your hands have probably taken a survey. How many people have created a survey in the room? It's probably about half of that, right? And so it's thinking about those users to drive them from having taken a survey to then becoming creators and becoming our customers. And so we can't limit usage. So the things that we drive you to pay for are things that hurt our virality. So as an example, branding. If you remove our brand, we put that in the highest paid package because it actually hurts our virality. So that's one stripe to think about. The other is users' willingness to pay for the features. So our higher end users who are willing to pay, who are at organizations and businesses, need higher end features like advanced logic. So those will go into our higher end packages.
And so that gets you to the pay feature. As you were kind of building this out, what kind of hurdles did you find to kind of figure out what were the right pricing points? Where did you learn the hard lessons?
So I'd say in terms of pricing and packaging, the most important thing is you have to constantly A/B test it. If you actually look at SurveyMonkey, we have different prices and packages, both by different geos. We display different features to different users based on both what channel they're coming from. So if they're coming from search, for example, we might show them something different than if they're coming from that viral channel where they have lower intent. Depending upon what we know about them, we're going to display different features to them on that pricing page. Whether we show you our monthly package or our annual packages as default, that is going to vary by geo. And you're going to want to A/B test that till no end because you can constantly optimize that conversion rate.
And then you talk about packages. Have you done anything, or have you found any correlation between where the packages show up, where the paywalls are, placement?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's this tricky balance between trying to make sure you're not getting in the user's way too much, but you're getting in the user's way enough that they actually see your feature and your paywalls. One of the biggest things we launched with success was this concept of try before you buy. So we let users in the survey creation process actually start using the paid features. We tell them this is going to be paying. But then as soon as they go to try to send the survey, we say, hey, you can't send this unless you either pay us or you disable these features that you have. So giving people as much ability to try or expose them to those features in a freemium model is really important.
How many drop off?
So if you think about conversion, so your free users are important to us. Over half of our traffic in terms of comes from usage and deploys and everything comes from that free base. So that free base is super, super important to us. But in terms of conversion rates, if you look across the industry, you're going to expect a conversion rate from a free user to a paying user of about 2 to 6%. And again, that is going to vary tremendously by market and by platform. You're going to get different rates on mobile than on web. You're going to get different rates in the US versus Europe or Asia.
Digging in a little bit on the conversion, where all do you measure? I mean, I think most of us measure quite a bit in terms of like who's on our website, what the conversion rates are. Where do you measure? And in particular, what have you found to be useful metrics and maybe noisy metrics? Because sometimes we can focus on the wrong thing. So what's kind of the metric story?
I believe very strongly that as an organization, you can only have 3 to 4 metrics that you have to focus on consistently and constantly. You just can't, on a daily basis, on a weekly basis, understand more than that. And for us, it's the number of free users you have, how many of those users engage with you, so in our case, deploy a survey, how many of those users convert, and the most important metric, of which even Ken was talking about, how many of those users retain, so what's your churn rate. But with each of those metrics, as soon as you start seeing dips or understanding, you have to have all of the data tracked to then be able to dig in. So for example, if we see a dip in our conversion rate, it could be because the mix of users changed. So whether how many users were coming from our viral component versus search has changed. It could be seasonality. So we have to look at everything year over year. And it could also be again, it's which platform or geos that they're coming from, because those have different rates. So it's important to have these high-level tracked metrics that you're watching like a hawk, but then have the ability to dig down if you see any anomalies in the data.
And who watches them? Is it just the executive team, marketing, sales, support?
So
you publish it?
So one of the first at SurveyMonkey, even when we were pretty small, one of the first hires we made was somebody whose job it was to publish those metrics openly to the entire organization. I believe extremely strongly in transparency of metrics throughout the company. And even as we've grown, we have a weekly metrics meeting and a monthly metrics meeting that everybody is invited to, and anybody can go to the dashboards and look at them. You need to make sure the whole organization is infused in that data-driven methodology, and so that, even as Ken said, minor tweaks, constantly iterating and improving those metrics can make a huge difference in the just the revenue of the company.
But does it get distracting maybe? I mean, I see a big dip or I see a big spike. Does the team start to focus in, or do you see people just get used to seeing them and wanting them to be in a certain spot?
So obviously when you're smaller, you're going to have more volatility in your data set. So you have to start understanding which volatility is normal versus not, but that's very easy to calculate, a statistical significance of what is volatility that you should expect versus what is the band of volatility that's abnormal. So it is important to do that, because what you don't want to do is see one day that's off and cause some sort of panic of everyone running around and digging into the numbers and checking every channel. But obviously as you start to see that trend, you want to absolutely do that digging in.
All right. What metrics didn't work that you thought would?
Metrics that we spent too much time looking at, probably. Yeah. I mean, I think again, it's looking at too many metrics where then you're getting distracted, I think is the biggest issue that you have, versus that there's any metric that is wrong to look at. I mean, you're going to learn to look at more metrics over time that do affect your business as you're breaking people into cohorts and as you're looking at what are the drivers underneath those. But I wouldn't say there's any metrics that you shouldn't track.
Fair enough. Mobile. So I read a really good post. I'll plug Selina's international post. I wrote it down over here. It's how SurveyMonkey cracked international. Really good post. I won't go into it. But I'd love a bit of a summary from you on 2 things. One, as you moved international and as mobile adoption has gone up, how have some of your expectations or some of your methodologies on the conversion changed? Absolutely.
So you should just expect you're going to have about a half of a conversion rate on mobile. It is much harder to engage a user, especially if you're trying to get them to do work. And similarly, internationally, I was even chatting with a European company, and they still have 50% higher conversion rates in the US. And a lot of that is based on the fact of consumers understand the freemium model, the willingness to pay, and there's also a fact that how you're thinking about payments. So in Europe, as well as in Asia, you have to offer a lot of different payment methods compared to the United States to help improve those conversion rates.
And so on the mobile side, when you say half, is it kind of like for all metrics, are you seeing a low number, or is it just on the conversion where you see the dip?
It's the conversion rate to paid. So, I mean, we do see a drop off in terms of our deployment rates, but you can continue to improve that by making your experience easier and easier to use on a mobile. But when you look at what people are willing to buy on a mobile device, it's still mostly, I mean, it's growing obviously rapidly, but the willingness to buy on a mobile phone is still smaller.
It depends. Candy Crush seems to have that figured out.
Yeah, games are quite different than productivity apps or even e-commerce.
Any game guys out here? No? Yeah. So let's talk about the other side of the equation. Conversion is one part of the problem, and then now let's talk about the churn. Do you spend the same amount of time looking at like the churn? How do you look at it? Again, the numbers.
Sure. So churn is I would say is actually the most important metric to look at, because it is much harder to acquire a new user than it is to necessarily keep your user once you have them. When you think about churn, there's two different types of churn. And we call it at SurveyMonkey retry churn, which are users that didn't mean to leave you. But they're users where their payment failed. So their credit card failed, their bank transfer failed. And that you can do a huge amount to improve that type of churn, right? It's looking at what is the reason it failed. Was it a hard decline? Was it a soft decline? How are you retrying that card? How are you messaging that user when their card fails to try to get them back? And that is one type of churn. And we've been able to reduce that churn in half since we started at SurveyMonkey, just over the past 6 years, just by optimizing each of those retries by error code, by market. The other piece of it is auto-renew off churn. And that's where a user intentionally says, I don't want to use your product anymore. And we see that in two different areas. One is as soon as people purchase. And obviously we survey them and ask them why they're turning it off. And the most common response for people who turn it off within their first 7 days is because as either a company or as an individual, they're not allowed to / don't want to do a product that has auto-renew. And the most effective thing you can do at that point is either offer them an invoicing methodology, or secondly, is offer that as they're coming up to their churn. So in our case, annually, 30 days prior, 7 days prior, and 1 day prior, we start messaging them and saying, hey, you're going to lose access to the site. Don't miss out on all these great features. Don't miss out on looking at your survey data. And so that's kind of half the churn of the auto-renew off churn. The second is obviously people who do it towards the end of their cycle. So those are people that, in a way, you haven't engaged enough through their experience. If they're turning it off at the end, there's not that much you can do because it's a little bit too late. What you actually want to do is start to see when all of your user base becomes inactive, because obviously the lower that users are engaging with you, their higher propensity is to churn. So as you start to see your engagement drop off, that's the time to start messaging those users and try to bring them back, whether it's through email, whether it's through site messaging. In our case, if somebody takes a survey and we recognize they're an existing and active user, we can target content at them.
So there were two things you said. One was on the auto off. So there's a timing window, the subscription's coming up. There you use timing to engage them. And in the other case, you don't use timing. The yearly subscription, you only talk to them when they drop off. Why is that?
So again, I think there's a case of if they've already told you that their auto-renew is off versus if they haven't, right? So people that kind of do it in the last 7 days of their cycle versus in the first 7 days. Those are going to be your peaks of when people turn your auto-renew off. It's going to be, generally, if you look at your first 7 days, it'll be about 30 to 40% of your total churn rate. It's a very good predictor of how much churn you're going to see.
And you mentioned you've done some work over the past 6 years that really improved your auto churn. What are some of the tips you can give, like actionable things of what you do?
Absolutely. So the biggest thing you can do for the people that really are still your good customers, but they have a payment issue, is we don't churn them out as soon as the payment fails. We continue to retry that card over a period of 14 to 21 days, depending upon the error code. So obviously, if you're getting a soft decline, not enough cash in the bank, you want to keep trying that card as an example, because you're going to be able to recover a good chunk of those users. Obviously, it's very different if you get a hard decline, like a lost or stolen card, then you want to turn off their access. But through that time period, you want to just message those users on a very regular basis, but at every single touch point you can. The other thing that that has proven effective for us is once that falls off is we have been able to take those churned users within the 60 to 90 days after and recover them through paid marketing, through retargeting on Facebook.
Retargeting, okay. And then the other thing you mentioned was when you have the users 7 months prior, 9 months prior, you see the usage drop.
Absolutely.
Is that for the customers that have some surveys going on, is that usage in terms of like total volume or just accessing the site? How do you kind of measure what the cliff is? Because I think a lot of us have different cliffs. Some have daily users, some have monthly users.
Yeah, so again, that has to depend on what your usage rates are. For us, it's very much based on, am I collecting responses in my survey and am I logging in to actually look at them? Or have I created a second survey? But that's gonna differ by business. So it's really looking at what are the activity rates you should be expecting and when do you see that fall off? And once you've lost the person after 30 or 60 days, it's very hard to recover them back.
And do you see, again, geo differences between North America, Europe?
Yeah, so again, in Europe, you are going to see much higher rates of auto-renew off at the very beginning because there's a lot more restriction for organizations to sort of keep that subscription-based product going. And that's where offering something like an invoice as an option becomes extremely important.
Got it. And so we've got a few minutes left. I could either ask you to tell a joke, which show of hands we could do.
No, thank you.
Okay, oh, that was a survey, quick survey. Or we can go and talk, because you've mentioned this a few times, the idea of you doing surveys. How many of you actively do surveys as part of your checkout pages? So when somebody's bought a product, do a survey. Because I found that very interesting when we talked about it. So I'd love to see, being SurveyMonkey, how you survey on checkouts and drops, because you talked about this.
Absolutely. So there's a few key places we found where marrying that explicit data to the constant A/B testing and implicit data of log data is really vital for being able to optimize the experience. And I'll give a few examples. One is we ask users after they purchase, what were the features or what were the items that drove them to purchase? What that has allowed us to do is take that data and optimize what features we show on the pricing page. So we look at who those users were that purchased. So were they trying to do customer satisfaction? What features were important to them? And then that's allowed us to then optimize the pricing page for other users like them. And we've seen literally a 20-30% lift in conversion rate when we're changing around the features based on segments in the display on the pricing page itself. But we learned what was important to them in purchasing processing by surveying them right after they finish.
And how many people fill that survey out right after I check out?
So in terms of the response rates that you should expect on a survey like that are probably around 20 to 30%. The other is on when a user cancels. So again, when they turn their auto renew off, you want to understand why. You really want to understand a few things. Like I said, one is that they don't have permission to keep auto renew on. That's a very good opportunity to offer them a different way. The second thing is they don't see a usage or need for your product at that time. Well, give them more reasons to use or need the product, right? And then another thing is that they're going to a competitor, and tracking that like a hawk in terms of the fact of where they're going and who they're going to and watching those rates is extremely, extremely important. Because if you start seeing a competitive product, go higher in terms of your cancellation rate survey, you need to either look at that from, in terms of what they're doing that is driving customers away from you. And then the third really, really important thing is just measuring your general, what we call product NPS, which is, would you recommend this site to a friend or colleague? And we sample about 5% of the people as soon as they sign out. And often that NPS score is a leading indicator of your conversion or engagement rates dipping, because people will start to say, hey, I'm having difficulty in your experience, your recommendation score starts going down, and you will start seeing that in your metrics over time. And so it is really important that you're starting to take that explicit data and marrying it to the A/B testing data and the implicit and quantitative data that you're getting on your site.
What's the response rate on the attrition? So when with the churn happening, do you still
Churn's
get like
happening,
20%?
yeah, you're going to get a very good response rate on that survey because they've just taken an action. So whenever you survey people after they've taken another action, they're often willing to do more actions, right? So if you've taken an action and said, hey, I'm turning off my auto renew here, people will answer you if you ask them quickly, what is the reason? You know, give them 4 reasons and 1 question. They're going to answer you.